And for more on that, let's go to our good friend on the phone line right now who joins us here, Chris Price of the Boston Globe, and formerly right here at WEEI. Mr. Price, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Christian. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Enjoying the very early, way too early Drake Maye MVP talk, which I don't even want to get into right now with you. But I would like to, at the very least, get your take on how, despite the fact that the first couple of games for Maye this year weren't exactly, the type of games where you watched them and thought, oh, he's really got it all figured out here early on in the season. This last month worth of games has been about as good as we've seen and as good as there's been in the league even. Like that's, just to even have that as something to fall back on at any point in the year is way above and beyond what I was expecting. Were you sort of like me going into this year? Or did you think that Maye would be able to do this before even like the trade deadline?
I thought the progression at the early start, through the early stages of the 2025 season was going to be incrementally. I didn't think it was going to be this dramatic. Now, part of it, a large part of it, honestly, is, the opponents of the last 3 weeks. You're not going to see many Pro Bowlers on those rosters. But at the same time, he really and the rest of the roster are following through on Mike Vrabel's first and most important football commandment, one he preached to us when he took the job back in January. An ability to take advantage of bad football. And they have shown they are able to do that, at least through these, this last month or so. I think that, you can make a real argument they should only have one loss because of what happened in the Steelers game. But yeah, Maye, the rest of the team, both sides of the ball, look, it hasn't been perfect. They got to figure out a way to run the ball better. And they also got to get a coverage linebacker. But I think it's safe to say that through 6 games, they have exceeded expectations.
Oh, yeah, no question about that. I expected they only win 6 games all year. So they're already knocking on the door of that one. And I just, for even someone like Mike Vrabel, who I like and who I thought, was going to be better than Gerard Mayo, how could he be worse? It seems as though, there's some issues still. Penalties are still a problem, so you can't say it's a perfect culture. But you can definitely tell that there is a whole new philosophy in that building, and it seems to be really working out here early on.
It is a functional football operation these days. And, the last couple of years, they got away from a lot of that. It's a professional top shelf organization again. I don't know how that's going to manifest itself at the end of the year when it comes to wins and losses, but we're already seeing the results. They're much better on offense than I think we gave them credit for. We thought they thought that they could be at the start of the year. A lot of the key positions, wide receiver, offensive line, where we thought that were going to be big question marks coming into the season, not exactly positions of strength, but they've been a lot better than anticipated. And then, you have that kind of steady group of veterans, some of them holdovers, some of them new faces like Morgan Moses, these veterans, these leaders, guys like Hunter Henry, who've been able to kind of steer the ship and really kind of make sure that, when they do play bad football, they don't play bad football over an extended period of time, more than, a series or two. So again, look, a lot of it boils down to the schedule, and I completely get that. It's one of, I wrote this last week. They could have one of the easiest schedules in the history of football since 1978. When it's all said and done, but at the same time, they get paid too. These are teams in the NFL, and you got to play the teams in front of you. And they're winning, and again, they're taking advantage of bad football.
Yeah, and beating a Buffalo team, which is one of the games in the schedule everyone circled as a loss, just like this Tampa Bay game coming out. It doesn't necessarily. And you trap games happen. I don't think one's coming up this weekend here with Tennessee. They really stink, but. I'm not giving. They haven't faced a lot of great defenses so far. Pittsburgh's probably the best defense they played, right?
Yeah, and that's important. And I'm glad you bring up the Tampa Bay game, too, because I think you can look at that on 2 levels. I think you can look at that as an opportunity for, again, like the Buffalo game, to measure themselves against a really good football team. I think Tampa Bay is probably on the short list of genuine Super Bowl contenders this year. And if you can go down to Tampa Bay and you can be competitive, that says something about your team and, your ability, your long-term ability. And it's not just, playing Carolina or knocking off New Orleans. Tampa Bay is a serious football team. If you want to be taken seriously as a football team, you go down to Tampa Bay and you at least put a competitive product on the field. I also think, too, the Tampa Bay game is going to give us a really good idea as to where Drake is in his overall development, because it's going to be a lot of Drake versus Baker Mayfield. And Mayfield, for my money right now, is probably the odds-on favorite to win the MVP. I think Drake Maye is in the conversation. He's in the top 5. but it's like, the elite quarterbacks. I think Baker Mayfield has gotten into that class of elite quarterbacks. And so we're going to get a chance to see a guy who is at the top of his game and see how he measures up against a guy like Drake, and seeing if Drake can kind of eventually get there sooner rather than later.
We're talking with Chris Price of the Boston Globe. Chris, I thought the defense against Buffalo was elite. I thought they were a little less than that against New Orleans. What was your overall impression of the defensive effort against Spencer Rattler and that some of those skill players? They have some good skill players on that team. But what was your overall impression of the defensive effort, and how do you see that unit sort of coming together here as the season progresses? I
was a little surprised by Rattler. I really was, man. He got the ball out quickly. He managed the offense. There's something there. I think that he's not going to the Pro Bowl this year, but I think he's the kind of guy who you can kind of start to build around a little bit, because you have so many options on the offensive side of the ball. You have Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara. It's just they have the guys there. It's just a matter of kind of getting them in position and kind of waiting for Rattler to kind of mature. That being said, the Patriots defense, I think, was a step behind on a lot of the plays on Sunday. And I think, you bring up the idea of New Orleans team speed. These fast teams, these teams that play on the carpet, whether it's not the Dolphins and the Raiders, they're a different kind of animal, but they've had problems with those teams where you can kind of you want to steer clear of kind of trying to get into a track meet. And there were a few moments on Sunday where it looked like the Saints were going to be running up and down the field all afternoon. So I would like to see some more defensive stops, some more key defensive stops. And I think part of it, again, like I said, they need a coverage linebacker. I don't know if Marte Mapu can eventually evolve into that role, but if you're talking about trade deadline possibilities, I think they need to get either an undersized linebacker or kind of an oversized safety to be able to lock down guys moving forward like Brock Bowers. So, again, we said this before, it's not perfect, but I think the defense has played well, and they've more than held up their own end when you talk about playing good complementary football.
You mentioned earlier on the run game and their inability to really get that going. You go further and further into the season. Josh McDaniels is working some magic here with Drake Maye in the passing offense. How much longer can they afford to run the ball this ineffectively, and what do you do about it?
Well, if we get to mid-November, mid to late November, early December, you're going to have to run the football. You are. It's just, I don't care who you're playing. They got the home game looking ahead. They're home against the Giants on December 1st. They're home against the Bills on December 14th. They're at Baltimore December 21st. You have to be able to figure out a way to run the ball effectively before then. I think there's a couple of things at play when you talk about this team's inability to run the football. First of all, they've moved guys in and out. Part of that is ineffectiveness. Part of that is ball security with Ramondre. Part of that is injury with Antonio Gibson. So it's hard to kind of get any sort of traction, any sort of rhythm. It's not an excuse. I'm just kind of telling you, why they haven't been able to run the ball. The other thing, too, and Ramondre kind of alluded to this the other day when I talked to him, it takes time to learn how to run behind an offensive line. And there are 4 new guys on this offensive line. Strengths, weaknesses, what they like to do, what they're good at, what they're not good at. You got to figure that out as a running back. And so I think they're getting there. The other thing, too, these running backs have to do a better job of running after contact, in avoiding contact. There's not a lot of missed tackles when you line up to stop the run against New England. And then the other thing, too, is they haven't been able to win those battles. As a running back, sometimes you got to figure out how to beat a guy. You're one-on-one with a guy, and you got to figure out how to beat him. And these backs so far this year haven't been able to do it. So there's a few things that are kind of holding them back at this point. I think they're getting close. It feels like they're getting close. They need one of those games where either Ramondre or Treyvon Henderson bust through for 100 yards and kind of, feels like it kind of get the ball rolling a little bit, but they are not where they want to be when it comes to running the football.
You concerned about Henderson with some of these other rookie running backs having big impacts right away, Janty and Scattaboo and, Judkins and some of these other guys? Are you concerned at all about Henderson and the slow start he's off to?
A little bit, because I was one of those guys who was pushing for him as a possible offensive rookie of the year candidate in the summer. I think we all were, because he had such a great summer. And, to have him have kind of an underwhelming start to his NFL career, look, it's going to happen. He's not going to, I want to be careful when I use this comp because it can be taken as hyperbole, but James White wasn't James White until like his second or third year. It takes a while, and I think they're deliberately slow playing it with him because they don't want to put too much on his plate too early. He's also had some problems with holding. The pass pro is not great, and you have to be good in pass protection if you're going to want to stay on the field. So there's a few things there that need to be cleaned up. But I think it's going to happen for him. I think he's going to be a part of this team. he's trending in the right direction. I think it's just taken a little bit longer than some people would like.
All right, before we let you go here, Chris, Tennessee Titans coming up on Sunday. Before the Saints game, a lot of people, including players on the team, were sort of warning themselves almost about overlooking a team like New Orleans. They're better than their record, etc. Any fear of that here with this Titans team that just fired their coach?
No, I don't think there's any fear of that. I think, look, here's my take on this. I think this locker room has bought into a point where they want to win this thing for Vrabel. You know how they're doing the game ball thing after every game, and you know when Diggs went back to Buffalo, they gave him the game ball. When Borregales kicked the game winner against the Dolphins, kid from South Florida, they gave him the game ball. They're going to want to win this thing for Vrabel, and I will bet you dollars to donuts if they do, and I think they're going to. If they do win this thing, there's going to be a scene in the locker room afterward where there's going to be some sort of emotional, hey, coach, this is for you, coming back to Tennessee, beating your old team. We knew there's a little juice for you in this game just because, it was against your old team. So I think the locker room is kind of going to respond to, in favor of the head coach this week because this game means something to him. I think he's kind of playing it cool a little bit, but I talked to some guys in the locker room after the New Orleans game. They want to win this thing for Vrabel. And I think they're going to play like that on Sunday.
All right, very good. Chris Price, Boston Globe. Great stuff as always. Always good talking football with you, buddy.
My pleasure. Take care, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, that is the great Chris Price of the Boston Globe joining us here on the Christian Arcand Show.